Hello and welcome to Hi-Fi update number 3. Now I've got two hi-fi components to show you today. The top one recently purchased, second hand, and one I've had for quite a few years, at the bottom, the stereo receiver. Now they're both made by Technics. They were both originally made in the late 90s. As you can see, they're both matching equipment, sort of matching casework. And the top model is the SL-PG490 CD player, and the bottom one is the SA-EX100 receiver. Now, if you've been watching my other videos, you're probably wondering why I've gone and bought a what is ultimately just a budget CD player. Now, for a while there, Technics actually stopped making hi-fi equipment, and unfortunately even put their DJ turntable out of production. But recently, they've actually got back into the hi-fi market. At the moment, there's only two ranges of product. One is idiotically expensive, literally each component literally costs as much as a car. But they've also made a more sensibly priced range of products as well. Still high-end hi-fi equipment, but I'd imagine as time goes on they'll probably filter down into the cheaper part of the market as well. But it's certainly nice to see Technics are back. Right, so first up we'll cover the CD player, the SL-PG490 Technics compact disc player. Now, first things first, this is a budget CD player. I mean, right down the bottom of the range budget CD player. I believe it sold for around the £100 mark. Back in the late 90s, which was very, very cheap for a CD player. There are three models in the range: the 390, 490 and 590. And basically the only difference between this 490 model and the 390 model is the headphone output here. Apart from that, they're exactly the same. Now, I went into a cash converter shop in my local town. Basically it's a pawn shop. People take things in to try and raise some cash, and that was the price. It's $14.99 with warranty. It was very nice to get something that cheap and actually have a warranty as well, as it's been tested and all the rest of it. So it's in full working order and guaranteed. I think it was for either 3 months or 6 months, but just the fact it's got a warranty with it is frankly astonishing. So it's very cheap, and this was literally the cost of one record or one old-fashioned priced CD. You know, it's not just CDs that can be bought for peanuts at the moment, it's CD players as well. And it's loopy cheap for something that is working. Now, it didn't come with a remote control. That's not actually an issue, as I have a remote control for the receiver, which will control the CD player as well, so it's not an issue. But if you see my other videos, you've probably seen that I've got other CD players, better CD players than this one. So why on earth did I rush out and buy a budget, cheapo CD player like this? And the answer is I wanted it for one purpose, and one purpose only, and that is burning in cables. And having a headphone socket on it will also enable it to burn in headphones as well. Now, the shop I bought this from actually had two players in there. One was the 390, I say without the headphone amp, and this was the 490. Now, 390 was in near mint condition with remote control, but was selling at £25. I say this was £14.99 or £15. But it did have the headphone socket as well, but it is pretty tatty. It's pretty scratched on top. This CD player has been purchased for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is as a cable burn-in device. I'm in the process of making a batch of DIY RCA interconnect cables, and when they're finished I want to be able to burn them in. Now, to do that I run a signal through them from the outputs here, say through the cables for about a week or so, 24/7. Now, the easiest thing to use to do this is a CD player, but rather than use one of my expensive high-end CD players and run them into the ground by leaving them on all week, it makes much more sense to just go out and buy a really cheap player, which is what I've done here. Now, I have owned really cheap players in the past, so a bit of a shame I sold them really, but as I say, this will do as a replacement, and this literally is the only reason this particular player was purchased. Now, what do I mean by burn the cables in? Well, literally get the cables, these are my existing cables, and you plug them in. Plug them into the RCA outputs there, and then run the signal through them. Now, the cable itself will then be daisy chained using these little devices, so RCA to RCA, little metal link, and we'll daisy chain to another cable, and all the cables will be chained together before going to the load that they will be applied to, which will be some kind of amplifier. In this particular case, I'll be using my musical Fidelity X-Cans headphone amplifier. Many wires will be daisy chained together and then ultimately plugged into the back of here, and the thing will be left running, I say 24/7 for about a week or so. So it's a very useful device for burning in cables. Okay, so say I'm using this as a burn-in player. but what do I actually play through it when I'm burning it in? And the answer is I actually use specialist CDs. You can use just music if you want, but if you can go out and buy something like this, which is especially meant to give your system a workout, it puts special tones through to demagnetize your system and give it a complete full frequency workout. And in this particular case, what I do is I take the part of this CD which actually does burn your equipment in, and I actually copy it onto a CDR and just put it on repeat, and then it goes in there and that goes on repeat, and just leave it literally 24/7 for about a week or so, and it helps burn things in. Now, do cables need burning in? And the answer is they're probably the least important thing to burn in. It's just good practice, that's all. It does make a little bit of difference, just helps things be stable when you start using them. Now, some people believe that things don't need burning in and it's all a load of twaddle. Now, how they can come to that conclusion, I've got absolutely no idea, because I'll show my little tiny iPod Shuffle that I bought years ago when I used to buy these iPod Shuffles. Well, I say little tiny iPod Shuffle. It's actually significantly bigger than the modern ones. Just looks like a USB stick with a whole gigabyte of memory space on it. Now, when I bought this thing, it sounded absolutely terrible, tinny as hell, awful. But I let it run. Yeah, MP3 copied CD through it until the batteries went flat, about 12 hours, and then charged the batteries back up and started reusing it, and it sounded fine. I mean, it's never going to sound brilliant, it's just an iPod Shuffle, but it sounded fine. It got rid of the tinniness and the harshness it had simply by being burnt in. Now, at the other extreme, I had this headphone amplifier made by Graham Slee Solo, which I bought quite a few years back. They've got newer models out now. This thing took 11 days of having test CDs run through it 24/7 before it sounded any good. And I mean any good. It sounded like a piece of junk until it had had things running through it for 11 days. The headphone socket on my integrated amplifier sounded better than this dedicated headphone amplifier. Now, to put this into perspective, this thing is, with its dedicated power supply, is nearly £600. The headphone socket on my £200 integrated amp sounded better than this, say for 11 days, and then on the 12th day this sounded about as good as the integrated amplifier did. 12 days. On the 13th day this blew everything else I've ever owned out the water. Completely different league. It doesn't look much, it looks like a cheap thing, but the sound quality on this is literally astonishing. But it took ages for it to burn in. In fact, it took so long for it to burn in, I don't know why they didn't do it at the factory, because they must get loads of returns from people that think this is a piece of junk, because it sounded awful until it was burnt in. So, a brief overview of the Technics SL-PG490 CD player. It's basic, black, or slightly browny black case that Technics were using at the time. It's proudly showing its MASH label on the front there. You've got the headphone socket here, analog headphone control there, on-off switch. Some of the controls are there, most of them are here with a display at the side. Fairly unusual to have the disc drawer central. That actually helps with regard to vibration, what have you. And I have to say the whole thing is very nicely made. I say it's in full working order and under warranty as well. So considering it was a real cheapo budget player, Technics have done a good job with the construction of it. Now if you look at the back, you can see the RCA inputs here, digital Toslink there, and the figure of 8 AC socket there. And I'm very glad it hasn't got a captive mains lead. A lot of cheap players have captive mains leads, and they're one of my pet hates. So that saved me a fair bit of work, not having to fit a socket onto the back of it. Having said that, it only uses a figure of 8, which is a typical figure of 8 cable that no doubt everybody knows, and it plugs in there. This is absolute garbage. This is ultimately ruining the sound. Now, because it's a figure of 8, we've got a slight problem, because decent quality leads nearly always use IC sockets, kind of like this one. This is just a cheap, say, Russ Yello lead, but obviously it's not going to work in there. So how on earth do we get around that problem? Well, the answer is you use an adapter like this. IC one end, figure of 8 the other. Just plug it in. Now I can plug the high quality lead into the back of the player, and job done. And obviously with the RCA leads, just stick RCA leads directly into the back there, and you're away. Now you can of course use this as a digital transport if you want. It has a digital out on it, in this case the Toslink style, which uses the optical connector, and so that can be plugged in to the optical socket there. Now, using CD players as transports and then using an external DAC is something that I'll go into in detail in the future. But it's nice that such a cheap player actually has that feature, as quite a lot of them don't. Now we've got the player plugged in, you can switch it on, and you can see the display come on there. So it might be flickering in the video, sometimes they do, but it certainly doesn't flicker in real life. And we can open the drawer, if it opens there. You can see there, and everything works on it, all the buttons feel nice. As I say, for its original value, the thing is very well made indeed. I'm surprised they managed to make such a solid piece of kit so cheaply. But now, what do I actually think of this player? And the answer is, I don't think very much of it at all, if I'm being brutally honest. It is, in my opinion, not worth bothering with. Now, I'll give the reasons, and the main one is, I bought this for $14.99. I know that you can get good budget CD players, and they'll be more expensive. They might be $24.99, but you're only talking an extra £10, and you have a player which is massively superior to this. And alright, back in the day when they were new, those players might have retailed for £200–300, but at the moment you can buy CD players very, very cheaply indeed, and it makes no sense, in my opinion, to buy a real low-end budget piece of kit like this when you can have something significantly better for hardly any additional cash. Now, this unit is pretty indicative of the hi-fi industry, mainstream hi-fi industry by the late 90s. It is just typical cheap black plastic equipment with a lot of marketing BS on the front of it. The first thing is it's called an AV receiver. AV receiver. Now, what is audiovisual about this product? And the answer is, one of the tape loop buttons has got VCR written on it. The fact it's got VCR written on it also shows how old this product is. But that's it, it's just a tape loop. It's got VCR on it, so now it's an AV receiver. AV. Now, the reason it's a receiver is simply because there's a radio built in, so fair enough, it is a receiver. But it's an AV receiver simply because one of the tape loops has VCR on it. It doesn't have surround sound or Pro Logic or anything like that, nothing. It's just an integrated amplifier with a radio, which you would call a receiver, but it's not an AV receiver. There's nothing AV about it. The second thing is this lovely sticker here, which very proudly claims that the AV stereo receiver has 2x100 watts. Yeah, technically speaking, it actually has 2x80 watts into 8 ohms RMS. Still a pretty hefty amount, but that 80 watt output doesn't have much headroom. You try and use its full power and this thing struggles like mad. You can go about halfway without any problems, but the idea that it's got usable 80 watts of power is just not really happening at all. In fact, there's a huge fan built into the back, which I'll show in a minute, to help cool it down when things get hot. The fact it needs a fan built into it just shows sort of how sort of cheaply designed it is inside. Now, I have opened it up. The output capacitors are small. You know, I've actually got CD players that have bigger output capacitors than that. It really is quite pathetic, and the heatsink obviously isn't up to the job, which is why they've got the fan in there. The whole thing has been designed as cheaply as possible while having sort of marketing drivel on the front to help sell it when it's sitting on the shelf in a hi-fi shop. And it's a shame that things really got to that point with equipment like this, because Technics do make a lot of good equipment. I'm not rubbish in the Technics brand at all. I've had Technics amplifiers and CD players that are very good, but this isn't really one of them. As far as the design goes, it's all nice and clean, lovely great big volume control here. But you've got these stupid little analog bass and treble and balance controls, horrible little things down here, almost like an afterthought. They should have been built into here, into the electronics, and you could have had a full graphic equalizer in there, but no, little analog controls. And it literally looks like the designer had finished designing the player, and then the supervisor came across and said, but you haven't put the tone controls on. And then the designer thought, well, damn it, I'll just stuff them down the bottom here and use little horrible little things that feel horrible, and tactile qualities revolting. So it's a bit hit and miss. Now turn it round. You can see the back of it. Now it's got a radio built in, so you've got one of those sort of flappy radio things, and you can see the huge fan here. Yeah, why has it got a fan? It's simply because they've cut corners with the heatsink and the whole sort of power output of it. They're pushing it too hard for the design, so they've got to cool it down with the fan. Very, very cheap and nasty way of doing things. Another cheap and nasty feature, it's got spring clip for the speakers. It's late 90s and they fitted that onto the back. Again, just to save money. That's cheap and nasty. It's what you expect on real cheapo equipment. Thankfully they've not got a captive mains lead, but again they've only got the figure of 8 lead, same as the CD player, and again it came with a very, very thin cable, not a big meaty cable. This is a power amplifier which proudly claims to have 100 watts on the front, yet it got supplied with a really, really thin, cheapo power cord. Yeah, not very, very good at all. And you've got the various inputs here, and you have got the 2 tape loops. You've got the tape and the other tape loop, which is called VCR, but it's just a tape loop. There's nothing AV about it at all. And it's even got a phono stage built in as well, moving magnet. Very nice touch, especially for something from the late 90s. That is actually quite a surprise, and I commend them for that. And it doesn't sound too awful either. So well done Technics for catering to people that still have turntables, especially by the late 90s. So, what do I think of the Technics SA-EX100 AV stereo receiver? And, well, the answer is, you probably already guessed, not all that much. Now again, it was a budget piece of hi-fi equipment from the late 90s, and it is just indicative of mainstream hi-fi products from that period. Things were going downhill fast. Not rubbish in the Technics brand. I've had Technics things in the past which are very good indeed. But this isn't one of them. Now again, it isn't a piece of junk or anything. Everything on it works. It still works fine. You know, it's reasonably well made. It's reasonably nice to use. It's got a big bold sound to it. It's not bad exactly, but there's just nothing special about it. It's just very ordinary. Now if I compare it with another amplifier from the 90s as well, admittedly this was from the early 90s, whereas the Technics was from the late. This is an NAD, or NAD, integrated amplifier, the 302. Again, lots of controls on the front, lots of different inputs and things, volume control. Very, very plain and boring looking equipment, the NAD equipment is very sort of utility looking, rather than this more sort of flashy Technics stuff. But the difference in sound quality between this and this is huge. Yes, this is more powerful. It's got 80 watts RMS. This has only got 25. And if you listen to them, it's obvious that this is the more powerful unit. But if you want to have double the volume of this 25 watt amp, you actually need to have an amplifier 10 times more powerful, because sound works in logarithm style. Not twice as powerful. It's not a 50 watt amp you're looking for if you want twice the volume of this. 10 times. You're looking at a 250 watt RMS amp. And there's something else to take into consideration. This is only 25 watts, but it's got a lot of headroom. This is 80 watts, it's got no real headroom at all, and I say I have pushed this to extremes, and it struggles to even run at 80 watts. So the difference between these two isn't that big. In fact, it's quite small in terms of power. Now in terms of sound quality, well, it kind of goes like this. This sounds real. This sounds synthetic. There's not really any point in going into any more detail than that. This is so much more musical than this, it is just untrue. If you've got a choice between these two products, you go for this every time. You don't even consider this, not ever. Completely different ballpark. And as I say, they were approximately the same price, full price retail, when they were new. Yet the top amplifier literally leaves the Technics in its wake. And here we have both units together. The Technics SL-PG490 CD Player on top of the Technics SA-EX100 stereo AV receiver, and they both can be operated by the same remote control, which is a nice touch. And as you can see, it's even got motorised volume control, which is very good. Now, after me saying what I think of the units, why on earth have I kept them? Well, as I've already said, this was purchased as a cable burn-in device, and I like hi-fi. I like listening to different things. Owning something like this makes me realise how good my good hi-fi equipment is. If you don't own or hear the poor quality stuff, you don't know how good your own gear is. And again, it's budget gear. If this is your first hi-fi system and you haven't had hi-fi before, and someone gives you this or you buy this cheaply, you'll think it's great. It's just when you put it in context of the good stuff, you'll realise that it isn't great. And as I say, not rubbish in the Technics brand. I've had good things by them before. And you've got to remember, these were very cheap budget components back in their day. Now, what will they be used for? Well, apart from this being used for burn-in, this setup is absolutely ideal for me to use in the garage, which is where it's going to be used. It'll be used when I'm out there, you know, doing work in the garage, cleaning tools, making things. I can play some music, I can play some CDs, absolutely ideal. And if it gets covered in sawdust and dirt and whatever, I don't care. You know, this stuff is as cheap as chips. You know, basically £15, £30. Stick some speakers on it and away I go. Very, very cheap hi-fi equipment. And, you know, it's perfectly decent in that role. So let's modify and accessorise the equipment. And the answer is, it's hardly worth bothering. You can buy equipment which is significantly better than this for hardly any more cash. It really is a waste of time, money and effort going to any sort of lengths to modify this gear. However, I would advise running it off basic mains filtration like the Tacima 6-way main strip I've shown in previous videos. Use cheap mains leads on it, say like the Russ Yello leads which I showed earlier in this video. And use whatever decent interconnects and sort of speaker wire you've got lying around, but no need to go to town. Just keep it simple. However, there is one modification, one tweak, which is absolutely necessary. This is the important part of this video, so listen up. Now there is one area that needs to be addressed on this equipment, as it does on the majority of equipment that I've come across, and there's a problem ultimately with the amplifier, and this problem happens again and again and again. In fact, over the years I've owned 10 different amplifiers, and out of those 10 amplifiers only 2 of them didn't have this problem. And it doesn't matter whether they're cheap or expensive, this problem nearly always occurs, and it can occur on new equipment as well as old. But in my experience, all the amplifiers and receivers I've had from the 70s, 80s and 90s, including this one, have this problem. There's only 2 of the more recent ones from the 2000s that don't. But even then, one of the ones I've had from the 2000s still does. So even modern things that are released right here, right now, can still have this problem. So what is the problem? Well, first things first, I've put a bit of tape on the volume control just so it shows up better in the video and you can see what I'm talking about more. Well, if I use the motorised volume control, you can see the volume control move from its current position, which is say the 7 o'clock position, and as the volume increases, obviously it says it's currently not plugged into the speakers, but as the volume increases it goes right the way around, nice and slowly, until it reaches the maximum position, which is about the 5 o'clock point. Now that's fairly typical for hi-fi equipment to have that amount of movement in the volume control. Now the volume control on here is linear, as it is with most equipment, and yeah, so that's the usable movement of the volume control. Now when I put a CD through it, a modern CD, doesn't have to be loudness wise, but it will be recorded to peak, you get the following. You start putting the volume up, loud, very loud, getting seriously loud, mega loud, idiot loud, distorted as hell. Look how much volume I've actually used. I've gone from there to there. That is the usable range of CD volume, despite the fact the volume control goes all the way round, right the way round to here. So all the volume from CD is right at the very, very beginning of the volume control. This makes no sense at all when you think about it. Now for years, that's how I used my equipment. I didn't know any better. I didn't know there was a problem, and it literally was, as I said, getting loud, getting louder, very loud, idiotically loud, distorted as hell. Tiny, tiny, tiny movement of the volume control to run CD. So what's going on? And it's simply this. The output's from the CD player at the top here. You plug your cable in, and it goes down to the CD input on here. Fairly obvious. And off you go. And that's how you connect hi-fi up, as we all know. Now, the voltage output from the CD is 2 volts. That's the standard voltage output of a CD player. That's the standard design. Nearly all of them are exactly 2 volts. A few slightly higher, and some are lower, but the standard for CD is 2 volts. And it goes down here, and it plugs the 2 volts into here. Now, this is where the problem occurs, down here. These inputs here, not only the CD, forget the Phono, that's a specialist one obviously for your turntable, but the CD and the 2 tape loops there, they all have the same input sensitivity. Now the input sensitivity on this amplifier, and most of the amplifiers that I've ever come across, is too high. They are designed to take the voltage output from analog equipment, not digital equipment. Analog equipment has a much lower voltage output. A tape deck, radio tuner, phono stage, they all have low outputs, and it's in the millivolts. It'd be 300 millivolts, something like this. This is 2 volts, that's 2000 millivolts. It massively overloads the inputs here. Too much voltage is going into the amplifier, and it cannot handle it. And what happens is, one, the volume is too loud, as I've already shown on the volume control, which is annoying, but more importantly, it is trashing the input. There is too much gain. Now, if this was a piece of studio equipment, you just alter the various gain controls and everything will be set to rights. Here, there's nothing you can do. There's no volume control in the CD player, there's no way of altering the input here. It just overloads it, and it trashes the sound. It makes CD sound very compressed, very harsh, very forced, very clinical, synthetic, artificial, just absolute garbage. It is quite a revelation when you sort the problem out, and basically by reducing the voltage that goes into here. So how do we do it? Well, on a basic consumer level, the way to do it is to buy inline attenuators. These are little RCA plugs at one end and the sort of phono plugs at the other, and they literally sit on the back of your amplifier. You just put them onto the back of the amplifier and you plug your cables back in as you did before, and that's it. These have dropped the voltage that goes through by a certain amount, in this particular case by 15 decibels. They tend to do the drop in decibel volume rather than voltage drop, and that completely and utterly removes the CD voltage overload as it goes into here, which means the amplifier now works correctly. Now we have the equipment turned around again. Now the inline attenuators are in place. So what's the volume control like now? Well, you know, it's starting to come on, it's getting louder. It's still fairly quiet there, not like it was before where it was very, very loud. It's fairly quiet, it's getting louder, it's getting louder. Certainly beginning to get quite loud now. That's loud, that's getting pretty loud. That's the sort of volume that you'd like to listen to the CD at. And yeah, now it's getting seriously loud. Now it's getting too loud, it's beginning to break up. Yeah, by the time you get around here, it's beginning to get distortion and problems in. But, you know, sensible, decent volume listening is around here. And you've got much, much finer control, much better control over the volume than you had before. And the sound quality is much, much better. It is fuller, it is richer, it is warmer, it is more natural, it is more analog, it's more realistic, it is much smoother. You've got much more amplitude, there's much more dynamic range, everything moves along at a much more relaxed pace, but a much more natural and controlled pace than before. Before, everything sounded like it was trying to rush out of the CD player. Now it just sounds, well, it sounds like analog pretty much. This tweak is very, very important. In fact, it isn't a tweak. Get the idea that this sorting out CD voltage overload is a hi-fi tweak or an audiophile gizmo or anything like that. Without this in place, you have a fault with your hi-fi equipment. You have an actual engineering electrical fault with your equipment that needs to be addressed if you ever want CD to sound good. It doesn't matter how expensive your CD player is, if you don't address this problem, if the problem exists on your equipment. It doesn't always exist, but if it exists on your equipment, if you don't solve it, your CD player will sound like a piece of junk, no matter how much it costs. The difference in sound quality is absolutely phenomenal. The biggest difference you'll ever make to the sound of CD is sorting out this problem. Now, it varies from equipment to equipment, and as I say, some equipment doesn't have this problem anyway. And some CD players, of course, have built-in volume control, so you can just reduce the volume on the CD player to solve it. But it is a very, very important issue, and it's one I will be covering again and again and again in my videos until it really does get rammed home. Because if this problem exists in your system, this will be the biggest improvement you ever get to the sound of digital equipment. CD players, DACs, DAT players, mini disc players, your computer audio, whatever. All of them have a high voltage output. All of them have the sound trashed if the amplifier isn't designed to take a high voltage input. This is absolutely imperative to good sound quality in your hi-fi equipment. So that's it for Hi-Fi update number 3 for the Technics SL-PG490 CD Player and the Technics SA-EX100 AV stereo receiver. Now, this video might seem like a bit of a downer because I've said both products aren't exactly that great, and I stand by that. They're not great. Not rubbishing on Technics. I've had Technics things in the past which are good, but these two aren't among them. And the whole point here is that these were bought second-hand very cheaply, but you can buy other hi-fi equipment second-hand very cheaply, which is vastly superior to what you're looking at here. It costs you just a few tens of pounds extra, and you'll have something which is in a completely different league, sound quality-wise. So, because of that, I can't honestly recommend either of these products to anybody. I mean, sure, if you're starting out, anything that's better than you've already had will be something that you'll really enjoy. But I've owned a lot of hi-fi over the years. I can compare this with a lot of different other hi-fi products of a similar price point, and these two just don't stack up at all. Now, with regard to the CD voltage overload, which is shown in the video, it's a very, very important problem which I will be coming back to again and again and again. If you're using a CD player with an amplifier, solid state amplifier or receiver from the 70s or 80s or 90s, you almost definitely have this problem. That's a 99% chance that you have this problem. In fact, most of the people watching this video have this problem with their equipment right now, and they just don't know it. It's absolutely imperative it is solved, because I don't care how expensive your CD player is, if you don't solve it, it will never ever sound any good. In fact, I personally believe a lot of what people believe to be CD sound, digital sound, is simply due to voltage overload and nothing to do with the format at all. As I've said before in some of my other videos, on my system, in my equipment, CD is warmer than vinyl. Digital is warmer than vinyl, and this is one of the ways that you achieve that. So, that's it for this video. Bye for now.